Dear important listener, welcome and thank you for listening to this heartwarming story that is a telling testimony of the greatness of God. I would like to know how far this story goes, and please write in the comment column from which country and city you are. With God's blessing.
A Legacy of Hope, the inspiring journey of Joseph. Chapter 1, Shadows of Loss. Joseph nodded, the weight of his mother's words pressing heavily on his heart. He didn't fully understand their significance at that moment, but something in her tone, so resolute yet so full of love, etched them into his memory. That night, as the stars glimmered above Cabira, Margaret drifted into a restless sleep. By morning, she was unable to rise. The same fever that had taken Daniel now coursed through her frail body. The village healer came again, his expression grim as he prepared his herbal mixtures, but there was little he could do. Joseph sat by her side, holding her hand and whispering the prayers she had taught him. God, he murmured, tears streaming down his face, please don't take her too. Please. Margaret's final moments were peaceful, her last words a soft affirmation of her faith. He will never leave you, my son. Remember that. And then, she was gone. A village without answers. The funeral was swift and solemn, much like Daniel's. Margaret was buried beside her husband, her grave marked by a simple cross made from the branches of the nearest tree. Joseph stood alone by the fresh mound of earth, staring blankly at the dirt beneath his feet. The villagers offered their condolences, but their words felt hollow. The days following his mother's death blurred into one another. Joseph wandered through the village, his small figure a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had struck his family. No one knew quite what to do with him. The neighbors who had once smiled warmly at Margaret now avoided Joseph's gaze, their discomfort palpable. He's just a boy, one woman whispered to her neighbor. But we have our own families to care for. The village elders eventually decided that Joseph would be sent to live with his uncle, Musa, in a neighboring village. Musa was a man of stern temperament and little patience, but he was Joseph's closest living relative. It's for the best, an elder told Joseph, though the boy didn't respond. He clutched a small cloth bundle containing all he owned, a worn shirt, a pair of shorts, and the Bible his mother had cherished. Arrival in Musa's household. The ox cart journey to Musa's village was bumpy and hot. Joseph sat in silence, the dry wind stinging his face as he held his bundle tightly. He tried not to think about what lay ahead, but the uncertainty gnawed him. Musa greeted him with a curt nod when he arrived. So, you're here, he said, his tone neither welcoming nor particularly kind. Lydia, Musa's wife, eyed Joseph with open disdain. She muttered something under her breath, her expression hard. You'll sleep in the kitchen, Musa said, pointing to a corner where a thin mat had been placed. And you'll work for your keep. Joseph nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He set his bundle down on the mat and sat on the floor, his legs drawn up to his chest. The kitchen smelled of smoke and grease, and the shadows cast by the flickering oil lamp danced eerily on the walls. That night, Joseph lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the voices of Musa and Lydia drifted through the thin walls. He's just another mouth to feed, Lydia complained. We can barely manage as it is. He'll earn his keep, Musa replied gruffly, or he won't eat. The weight of survival. Joseph quickly learned that life in Musa's household was one of relentless toil. Each day began before dawn, with Lydia barking orders for him to fetch water from the well or gather firewood. His small hands, unused to such grueling labor, became blistered and raw. His thin body grew even frailier from the constant demands and the meager portions of food he was given. Faster, boy, Lydia would shout if he lingered too long over a task. We don't have all day. When he made mistakes, spilling water from the heavy jugs or accidentally dropping firewood, Musa's punishments were swift and severe. A slap across the face, a shove that sent him sprawling into the dirt. Joseph bore it all silently, his lips pressed together to keep from crying out. At school, the situation was no better. His tattered clothes and gaunt appearance made him a target for bullies who teased him mercilessly. Orphan boy, they sneered, pushing him into the mud. Why don't you run back to your dead parents? The words cut deeper than any physical blow, but Joseph refused to let them see him cry. He clenched his fists and bit his lip, enduring the taunts in silence. A seed of change. One sweltering afternoon, Joseph sat by the village well, his legs dangling over the edge as he tried to summon the energy to fill another jug. The sun beat down mercilessly, and his arms ached from the morning's work. A shadow fell across him, and he looked up to see an elderly woman with a kind face. She held out a piece of bread, her eyes filled with quiet sympathy. "You look hungry," she said. Joseph hesitated, then reached for the bread, his fingers trembling. "Thank you," he whispered. The woman smiled and patted his shoulder. "The world can be harsh, but there is always kindness to be found if you look for it." Her words stayed with Joseph long after she had gone. That evening, as he sat on his mat in the dimly lit kitchen, he opened his mother's Bible for the first time in weeks. His eyes fell on a passage from Psalm 34, verse 18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Joseph read the verse over and over, the words seeping into his soul like rain on parched earth. For the first time since his parents' deaths, he felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name hope. Foreshadowing change. As the weeks turned into months, Joseph clung to that fragile hope. He began to realize that if his life was going to change, he had to be the one to change it. The thought scared him, but it also gave him a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Late at night, when the rest of the household was asleep, Joseph would sit by the dim light of the oil lamp, reading his mother's Bible and whispering prayers into the stillness. "God," he would say, his voice trembling, "if you're there, show me the way." Unbeknownst to Joseph, his prayers were the beginning of a journey that would transform his life in ways he could never have imagined. Chapter 3. A Defining Incident. The heat of the midday sun bore down relentlessly on Cabira, the red dirt paths shimmering with heat waves. Joseph, now 13, trudged along the edge of the village, a heavy water jug balanced on his head. His body, thin from years of malnourishment, ached from the weight, but he pressed on. This was his daily life, a cycle of labor and exhaustion, punctuated only by the stinging words of Musa and Lydia or the jeers of school bullies. On this particular day, as Joseph approached the marketplace, he noticed an unusual gathering. A small crowd had formed near the village square, their attention fixed on a man who stood atop an overturned crate. He was dressed simply, in a loose white shirt and worn sandals, but his presence was commanding. His voice carried over the murmur of the crowd, rich and resonant. "Forgiveness," the man was saying, "is not a weakness. It is the strength to break the chains of anger and pain." Joseph hesitated, torn between curiosity and the need to return home. Musa would be furious if he was late. Yet something about the man's words held him in place, as if an invisible hand had reached out and stilled his steps. The preacher's message. The man introduced himself as Pastor Emmanuel, a traveling preacher who had come to Cabira to share God's word. His message was one of hope and redemption, a stark contrast to the struggles and despair that defined much of Joseph's life. "You may think you are forgotten," Pastor Emmanuel said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "You may believe you are too broken, too unworthy to be loved. But let me tell you this, God sees you. He knows your pain, and he has not abandoned you." The words struck a chord in Joseph. For years, he had felt invisible, a burden to those around him. The idea that someone, anyone, might care for him was almost too much to believe. The pastor continued, weaving stories of forgiveness and transformation. He spoke of a man who had been wronged by his closest friends, yet chose to forgive and found peace in doing so. He described a woman who had lost everything but discovered her worth in God's love. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, Pastor Emmanuel said. It means letting go of the bitterness that chains your heart. It means trusting God to heal your wounds. Joseph felt his throat tighten. Bitterness was a word he understood all too well. It had crept into his heart over the years, growing like a dark vine, choking out any remnants of hope or joy. Yet here was this man, speaking as if he knew Joseph's innermost thoughts, offering a way to break free, a personal connection. After the sermon, the crowd began to disperse, some lingering to speak with the pastor. Joseph hung back, unsure if he should approach. But as he turned to leave, Pastor Emmanuel's voice called out to him. "Young man," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "What is your name?" Joseph rose, his heart pounding. Slowly, he turned to face the pastor. "Joseph," he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the ground. Pastor Emmanuel stepped closer, his expression kind. "Joseph, you remind me of someone I knew, a boy who carried more weight on his shoulders than any child should. He thought he was alone, but he wasn't. God was with him every step of the way, guiding him to something greater." Joseph's eyes filled with tears, though he fought to hold them back. "But why would God care about me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just nothing." The pastor crouched to meet Joseph's gaze. "You are not nothing," he said firmly. "You are a child of God, precious in his sight. And you have a purpose, Joseph, even if you can't see it yet." For the first time in years, Joseph felt a spark of something he thought he had lost: hope. It was small and fragile, like a single flame in a dark room, but it was enough to keep him standing. A new perspective. That evening, as Joseph sat on his mat in the dimly lit kitchen, he replayed the pastor's words in his mind. He opened his mother's Bible, which had become a source of solace in his darkest moments, and turned to a passage the pastor had mentioned, Matthew 11 verses 28 to 30. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," he read aloud. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." The words resonated deeply. Joseph closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, hesitant but sincere. "God, if you're really there, help me. Show me what to do." Over the next few days, Joseph began to notice small changes in himself. The bitterness that had consumed him for so long started to loosen its grip. He still carried the weight of his struggles, but it no longer felt as heavy. For the first time, he dared to imagine a future that was different from his present reality, a decision to forgive. One afternoon, as Joseph returned home with a load of firewood, Lydia scolded him for being late. Her words were sharp, her tone laced with contempt. Normally, Joseph would have lowered his head and retreated in silence, anger simmering just beneath the surface. But this time, something shifted. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, meeting her gaze. "I'll try to do better." Lydia blinked, momentarily taken aback. She muttered something under her breath and turned away, but Joseph noticed a flicker of uncertainty in her expression. It was the first time he had responded to her anger with calmness instead of fear or resentment. That night, as he lay awake on his mat, Joseph realized that forgiveness wasn't just about releasing others from blame, it was about freeing himself from the chains of anger and hurt. He didn't know if Musa or Lydia would ever change, but he could choose to change how he responded to them. A seed of transformation. Pastor Emmanuel stayed in Kabira for a few more days, holding evening gatherings where he shared more stories of faith and redemption. Joseph attended every session, sitting quietly at the back, absorbing every word. The pastor noticed his presence and made a point to speak with him afterward. "You have a strong spirit, Joseph," he said one evening. "I see it in the way you listen, the way you hold yourself. Never forget that strength comes from God, and He will guide you if you let Him." Those words became a mantra for Joseph. He began to approach his daily life with a newfound sense of purpose. The work was still hard, and the challenges remained, but he no longer felt as though he was carrying them alone. Each morning, he whispered a prayer for strength, and each evening, he thanked God for getting him through another day. For the first time, Joseph began to see glimpses of a brighter future. He didn't know what that future would look like, but he was willing to trust that it was worth striving for. This expanded chapter highlights Joseph's pivotal encounter with Pastor Emmanuel, illustrating the transformative power of faith and forgiveness. The next chapter will delve into Joseph's decision to pursue education as a means of changing his life and the challenges and triumphs that come with it. Chapter 5: Growing in Faith and Strength. The journey to the mission school felt like stepping into a new world. For Joseph, it was the first time he had ventured far beyond Kabira, and the sights and sounds of the bustling towns they passed along the way were both exciting and overwhelming. The school itself, perched atop a hill and surrounded by lush greenery, seemed like a beacon of hope, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the sunlight. Joseph clutched his bag tightly as he stepped through the iron gates. His heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and fear. What if he didn't belong here? What if he failed? But as he looked around at the other students, some chatting animatedly and others walking purposefully across the courtyard, he reminded himself of Pastor Emmanuel's words, "You are not nothing. You have a purpose, a warm welcome." The school's headmaster, a tall man with kind eyes named Reverend Samuel, greeted Joseph warmly. "Welcome, Joseph," he said, shaking his hand firmly. "We're glad to have you here. I've read your application. You've been through much, but I see great potential in you." Reverend Samuel's words filled Joseph with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, someone in authority had looked beyond his hardships and seen his worth. It was a feeling he would carry with him as he began his new life at the school. Joseph was assigned to a small dormitory that he shared with 3 other boys. The room was simple but clean, with neatly made beds and a wooden desk for each student. His roommates, Peter, James, and Daniel, were friendly and curious about his background. "Where are you from?" Peter asked as they unpacked their belongings. "Kabira," Joseph replied, his voice hesitant. "That's far," James said. "What brought you here?" Joseph hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Finally, he said, "I want to learn. To make a better life for myself." The boys nodded, their expressions thoughtful. "You're in the right place," Daniel said with a smile. "This school changes lives." Finding his footing. The first few weeks were challenging. The academic workload was heavier than anything Joseph had experienced, and he often stayed up late into the night, poring over textbooks and scribbling notes. The other students seemed more confident and better prepared, and Joseph couldn't help but feel out of place. But he refused to let those feelings hold him back. Each morning, he woke early to read his Bible and pray, asking God for the strength to persevere. His favorite verse became Philippians 4 verse 13, "I can do all things through him who gives me strength." He repeated it to himself throughout the day, a mantra that bolstered his resolve. Joseph's teachers noticed his determination. Mrs. Adongo, his English teacher, often praised his essays for their depth and thoughtfulness. "You have a way with words, Joseph," she said one afternoon, handing back an assignment marked with a bright red A. "You should consider writing more. You have a gift." The encouragement filled Joseph with a sense of accomplishment. He began to see himself not as the orphan boy from Kabira, but as someone with potential, someone who could achieve great things. Faith and community. The mission school placed a strong emphasis on spiritual growth. Morning devotions were held daily, and Sunday services were vibrant gatherings filled with psalm, prayer, and heartfelt sermons. For Joseph, these moments became a source of solace and renewal. He found comfort in the hymns, the way their melodies lifted his spirits, and in the messages of hope and redemption that echoed through the chapel. One Sunday, Reverend Samuel preached about forgiveness. "Forgiveness is not about excusing what has been done to you," he said. "It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger and pain. It's about trusting God to bring justice in his time." The words struck a chord with Joseph. For years, he had carried the bitterness of Musa and Lydia's cruelty, their harsh words and actions replaying in his mind like a haunting refrain. But sitting in the chapel that day, surrounded by the warmth of the congregation, he realized that holding onto that anger was only hurting himself. After the service, Joseph approached Reverend Samuel. "How do you forgive someone who's never been kind to you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Reverend Samuel placed a hand on Joseph's shoulder. "You start by asking God for the strength to let go," he said. "Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination." but each step you take brings you closer to peace. That night, Joseph knelt by his bed and prayed for Musa and Lydia. The words didn't come easily, and his heart still ached with the weight of their mistreatment, but he trusted that God would help him through the process. It was the first step on a path that would ultimately lead him to freedom, discovering his talents. As Joseph settled into life at the mission school, he began to uncover talents he hadn't known he possessed. He joined the school's debate club, where his quiet but thoughtful demeanor made him a powerful speaker. In one debate, he argued passionately about the importance of education in breaking the cycle of poverty, drawing on his own experiences to make his point. "You speak with such conviction," the club's advisor told him afterward. "You have a gift, Joseph. Never stop using your voice." Joseph also excelled in writing. His essays, often inspired by his faith and personal journey, were published in the school's newsletter, earning him recognition among his peers. One piece, titled "The Strength of Forgiveness," was particularly well received, with students and teachers alike praising its honesty and insight. Through these activities, Joseph began to build a sense of confidence and self-worth. He realized that his past, though painful, had shaped him into someone who could inspire others. His scars, both physical and emotional, were no longer symbols of weakness, they were marks of resilience, a test of faith. Despite his progress, Joseph's journey was not without its challenges. The trauma of his past sometimes resurfaced in unexpected ways, leaving him feeling vulnerable and unsure. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, he found himself consumed by doubt. "What if I'm not strong enough?" he whispered to the empty dormitory, his voice choked with emotion. "What if I fail?" In that moment, he reached for his Bible and turned to Isaiah 41 verse 10. "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." The verse brought a sense of calm that washed over him like a gentle tide. He closed his eyes and prayed, asking God for the courage to keep going. As he did, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that he was not walking this path alone. A glimpse of the future. By the end of his first year at the mission school, Joseph had transformed in ways he never thought possible. He was no longer the timid, broken boy who had arrived with nothing but a bag of clothes and a Bible. He was a student, a writer, a speaker, and most importantly, a believer in the power of faith and perseverance. One evening, as he sat on the steps of the chapel, watching the sun set over the hills, he thought about how far he had come. "Thank you, God," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." Joseph knew there was still much work to be done, but he was no longer afraid. With each passing day, he grew stronger in his faith, his abilities, and his resolve to make a difference in the world. Chapter 6: Overcoming Challenges. The new year at the mission school brought fresh opportunities for Joseph, but it also presented a set of challenges that would test his resilience and faith. The confidence he had built during his first year was fragile, and while his teachers and peers saw potential in him, Joseph still wrestled with the weight of his past. The scars of abandonment and abuse lingered, resurfacing in moments when he least expected them, confronting the ghosts of the past. One crisp evening, Joseph sat in the school library, flipping through a history textbook. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustling of pages and the occasional creak of a wooden chair. Yet, Joseph's mind wandered, his concentration splintering as memories of Kabira crept into his thoughts. He could see Musa's scowling face, hear Lydia's sharp words, and feel the sting of the beatings he had endured. His chest tightened, and he shut the textbook abruptly, resting his head on his folded arms. "Why does it still hurt?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Mrs. Adongo, his English teacher, happened to pass by and noticed his distress. She approached him gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Joseph," she said, her tone soft yet firm, "are you all right?" Joseph hesitated before nodding. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though his trembling hands betrayed his words. Mrs. Adongo pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "You don't have to carry your burdens alone," she said. Sometimes speaking about them can help. Joseph looked at her, his eyes filled with unshed tears. For the first time, he opened up about his life in Cabura, the loss of his parents, the abuse he endured, and the deep sense of unworthiness that lingered within him. As he spoke, Mrs. Adongo listened intently, her expression a mixture of compassion and sorrow. When he finished, she said, "Joseph, what you've been through is unimaginable. But you're here now, and that means you have already overcome so much. God has a plan for you, even if it's not yet clear." Her words struck a chord with Joseph. He realized that while his past would always be a part of him, it didn't have to define him. With prayer and persistence, he could confront his pain and use it as a source of strength. The weight of expectations. As Joseph excelled in his studies and extracurricular activities, he began to attract attention from his peers and teachers. He was elected as the vice president of the debate club and invited to write for the school's annual magazine. While these opportunities filled him with pride, they also brought an unspoken pressure to succeed. During one particularly intense debate competition, Joseph stumbled over his opening remarks. His nerves got the better of him, and for a brief moment, he froze. The audience fell silent, the weight of their expectations palpable. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice shaky. "I'll start again." Taking a deep breath, Joseph steadied himself and delivered a compelling argument that earned his team a victory. Though his performance was ultimately praised, he couldn't shake the lingering embarrassment of his initial failure. That evening, Joseph confided in Peter, his roommate and close friend. "What if I'm not good enough?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. "What if everyone is wrong about me?" Peter, ever the optimist, clapped him on the back. "Joseph, you're human. We all stumble. But what matters is that you get back up, and you did. That's what makes you strong." Joseph nodded, though his heart remained heavy. It was a lesson he would have to learn repeatedly. Success wasn't about being perfect, but about persevering through imperfections. Facing prejudice. As one of the few scholarship students at the mission school, Joseph sometimes faced subtle prejudice from wealthier classmates. Though most of his peers treated him kindly, there were those who looked down on him because of his background. During a group project in science class, a student named Mark scoffed when Joseph suggested an idea. "What would you know about this?" Mark sneered. "You're just a charity case." The words stung, but Joseph refused to let them see his hurt. "I know enough to contribute," he replied evenly, "and I'm willing to learn more if I don't." The exchange didn't go unnoticed by Mrs. Akello, their science teacher. After class, she pulled Mark aside and sternly reminded him of the school's values. But she also spoke with Joseph, offering him words of encouragement. "Don't let anyone's judgment diminish your worth," she said. "Your place here is earned, not given. Remember that." Joseph took her words to heart, resolving to let his actions speak louder than the prejudice of others. He poured himself into the project, and when their group received top marks, faith as a source of strength. Throughout these challenges, Joseph leaned heavily on his faith. He spent time in the school chapel each evening, kneeling before the altar and pouring out his fears and frustrations to God. The act of prayer became a balm for his soul, a reminder that he was never truly alone. One evening, as he sat in the chapel, Reverend Samuel approached him. "You've been spending a lot of time here, Joseph," he said with a smile. "What's on your heart?" Joseph hesitated before replying. "Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting a battle I can't win," he admitted. "No matter how hard I try, it's never enough." Reverend Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "Life is full of battles, Joseph. But remember this, the victory doesn't come from your strength alone. It comes from trusting in God. Lean on Him, and He will carry you through." The Reverend's words resonated deeply with Joseph. That night, he wrote Philippians 4 verse 13, "I can do all things through him who gives me strength," on a piece of paper and tucked it into his Bible. It became his guiding verse, a source of inspiration whenever doubt crept in, turning pain into purpose. As Joseph continued to grow academically and spiritually, he began to think about how he could use his experiences to help others. He started volunteering at the school's mentorship program, working with younger students who struggled with self-esteem or faced challenges similar to his own. One boy, Daniel, reminded Joseph of himself at a younger age, quiet, withdrawn, and filled with self-doubt. Joseph spent hours talking with him, encouraging him to believe in his potential. A new perspective. By the end of his second year at the mission school, Joseph had faced and overcome numerous challenges. He had learned to confront his past, to rise above prejudice, and to find strength in his faith. Though the road ahead was still uncertain, he felt more prepared than ever to walk it. One evening, as he stood at the edge of the school grounds, watching the sun set over the hills, Joseph reflected on his journey. He thought about the boy he had been when he first arrived, the boy who was afraid, broken, and unsure of his place in the world. "I'm not that boy anymore," he whispered to himself, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm becoming who I was meant to be." With each step forward, Joseph was transforming into a beacon of hope and resilience, a living testament to the power of faith and perseverance. Chapter 7. Becoming a Messenger of Peace. Joseph's final year at the mission school was marked by both reflection and ambition. The boy who had once doubted his worth was now recognized as a leader among his peers, a voice of reason and hope in the community. Yet, Joseph felt a stirring in his heart, a call to do something greater, something that would carry the lessons he had learned into the world beyond the school's walls. A new responsibility. As the school year began, Reverend Samuel approached Joseph with a proposal. "Joseph," he said one afternoon as they walked through the school's garden, "the student body looks up to you. You've grown into a remarkable young man, and I believe you're ready for more responsibility. How would you feel about organizing the annual Peace and Reconciliation Workshop?" Joseph stopped in his tracks, the weight of the offer sinking in. The workshop was a significant event at the mission school, bringing together students, teachers, and community leaders to discuss ways to resolve conflicts and promote unity. It was an honor and a daunting challenge. "I'd be honored, Reverend," Joseph said after a moment, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. "But do you think I'm ready for something like this?" Reverend Samuel smiled. "You've lived through challenges most people can't imagine, Joseph. You understand the importance of peace and forgiveness better than anyone. I have no doubt you're ready." Encouraged by the Reverend's confidence, Joseph threw himself into planning the workshop. He spent weeks coordinating with staff, creating an agenda, and inviting guest speakers. His vision was to make the event more than just a discussion, to create a space where people could share their stories, heal old wounds, and leave with a renewed sense of purpose. The workshop. The day of the workshop dawned bright and clear, the air buzzing with anticipation. Students and community members filled the school's assembly hall, their chatter fading as Joseph stepped onto the stage to deliver the opening remarks. Standing before the crowd, Joseph felt a flicker of doubt. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the microphone, but then he remembered the verse he had written down so many times: "I can do all things through him who gives me strength." Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice steady. "Today, we gather not just to talk about peace, but to live it. Each of us carries pain, struggles, and conflicts in our hearts. But we also carry the ability to forgive, to heal, and to build something better." As Joseph continued, he shared his own story, the loss of his parents, the hardships he endured, and the transformative power of forgiveness. His words resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom wiped away tears as they listened. The workshop was a resounding success. Participants engaged in heartfelt discussions, shared personal experiences, and committed to fostering peace in their own lives. Joseph felt a profound sense of fulfillment as he watched people connect and support one another. An unlikely reunion. In the weeks following the workshop, Joseph's reputation as a leader and peacemaker grew. Word of his efforts spread beyond the school, reaching neighboring villages and even the distant town of Kabira. It was there that an unexpected figure from Joseph's past heard about his achievements: Musa. One afternoon, as Joseph was returning from a study session in the library, he saw a familiar figure waiting near the chapel. It was Musa, his face lined with age and his posture stiff with discomfort. Joseph's heart raced as a flood of emotions, anger, fear, confusion, washed over him. "Joseph," Musa said, his voice hesitant. "I heard about what you've been doing. I wanted to see you." For a moment, Joseph didn't know what to say. The memories of Musa's cruelty were still fresh in his mind, but so were the lessons of forgiveness he had embraced. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "Let's talk," he said, gesturing toward a nearby bench. As they sat, Musa began to speak. His words were halting, filled with regret. "I didn't treat you well, Joseph. I was angry at the world, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry." Joseph studied Musa's face, searching for sincerity. What he saw was a man burdened by guilt, his once harsh demeanor softened by time. "I've forgiven you," Joseph said quietly. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger would have destroyed me." Musa's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Joseph saw the humanity in the man who had caused him so much pain. They talked for hours, their conversation a mixture of apologies, explanations, and tentative reconciliation. When Musa left, Joseph felt a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed, a vision for the future. The encounter with Musa solidified Joseph's resolve to dedicate his life to helping others. He began to dream of creating an organization that would support vulnerable children, those who, like him, had faced unimaginable hardships. He envisioned a place where they could find shelter, education, and hope. With the encouragement of his teachers and friends, Joseph began laying the groundwork for his dream. He wrote letters to potential donors, shared his story at local gatherings, and worked tirelessly to build connections with organizations that could help fund his vision. One evening, as he sat in the chapel, Reverend Samuel joined him. "You've come a long way, Joseph," the Reverend said, his voice filled with pride. "Your faith and determination are inspiring. What you're doing will change lives." Joseph smiled, a mixture of gratitude and determination in his eyes. "I want to give others the same chance I was given," he said, "to show them that their past doesn't have to define their future." A messenger of peace. By the time Joseph graduated from the mission school, his organization was well on its way to becoming a reality. With the help of donors and volunteers, he established a small center in Kabira where orphaned and at-risk children could receive education, counseling, and support. Joseph also began traveling to schools, churches, and community centers to share his story. His speeches, filled with honesty and hope, resonated with audiences of all ages. He became a sought-after speaker, invited to international forums to discuss the power of education and forgiveness in transforming lives. Through it all, Joseph remained humble, attributing his success to God's grace. "I am not a hero," he often said. "I am simply someone who was given a second chance, and I want to pass that on to others." The ripple effect. Joseph's efforts created a ripple effect that reached far beyond Kabira. Children who once felt invisible began to believe in their worth. Families found healing through the principles of forgiveness and reconciliation. And communities, once divided by conflict, came together in pursuit of peace. One young girl, Amina, who had lost both her parents to violence, summed up the impact of Joseph's work perfectly. "When I came here, I thought my life was over," she said during a school event. "But Joseph showed me that I still have a purpose. He gave me hope." A light that shines. As Joseph stood before a packed auditorium in a bustling city, preparing to deliver yet another speech, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. His journey had been long and difficult, but it had led him to a place where he could make a difference. "My story is not unique," he told the audience, his voice steady and clear. "There are countless children like me, children who feel forgotten, broken, and unworthy. But I am here to tell you that they are not forgotten. They are not broken. They are not unworthy. And with faith, education, and love, we can help them see that." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Joseph's focus remained on his message. For him, the true reward was seeing lives transformed and knowing that he was fulfilling the purpose God had set before him. Chapter 8, A Legacy of Hope. The cool evening breeze rustled the leaves of the acacia trees as Joseph sat on the porch of the small but thriving center he had built in Kabira. The place was alive with the sounds of children laughing and playing, their voices a testament to the transformation that had taken root in this once overlooked village. Joseph gazed out at the scene, his heart swelling with gratitude and a profound sense of purpose. The journey from despair to hope had been long and fraught with challenges, but as Joseph reflected on the path he had walked, he knew that every hardship, every trial, had prepared him for this moment. His life was no longer defined by pain or loss, but by the countless lives he had touched and the legacy of hope he was creating. The flourishing of Kabira Center. The center Joseph had established had grown beyond his wildest dreams. Initially a modest shelter offering food and education to a handful of children, it had expanded into a vibrant community hub. Classrooms buzzed with activity where children eagerly learned to read, write, and dream of futures far brighter than their pasts. Counselors worked tirelessly, helping the children process their trauma and rebuild their self-esteem. Joseph walked through the grounds daily, greeting the children by name, listening to their stories, and offering encouragement. He was more than a leader to them. He was a father figure, a mentor, and a living example of resilience and faith. One of the children, a boy named Samuel, had arrived at the center after losing both parents to conflict. When Samuel first arrived, he was withdrawn and angry, lashing out at anyone who tried to help him. Joseph recognized the pain in Samuel's eyes. It was the same pain he had carried for so many years. "Samuel," Joseph said one afternoon, sitting with the boy under the shade of a tree, "I know how heavy your heart feels right now, but I want you to know that you're not alone. This place is your home now, and we're here for you." It took time, but Samuel slowly began to open up. He started attending classes, making friends, and sharing his story. Watching Samuel's transformation reminded Joseph of the power of love, patience, and faith to heal even the deepest wounds. Recognition and responsibility. Joseph's work did not go unnoticed. Word of the center's success spread, and soon, local leaders and international organizations began reaching out to learn more about his methods. Invitations poured in for Joseph to speak at conferences, share his story, and advocate for the rights of vulnerable children. One such invitation came from a global summit on education and peace-building held in Nairobi. Joseph hesitated at first. Public speaking still made him nervous, and the thought of addressing such a large audience was daunting. But he knew this was an opportunity to amplify his message and inspire others. At the summit, Joseph stood on a brightly lit stage, his heart pounding as he faced an audience of policymakers, educators, and activists from around the world. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "My name is Joseph," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I was once a boy who believed I had no future. I lost my parents, my home, and my sense of self. But through faith, education, and the kindness of others, I found a new path." He spoke of the challenges he had faced, the people who had lifted him up, and the children who now found hope at the center in Kabira. His words were raw, honest, and deeply moving, drawing tears and standing ovations from the audience. After the summit, Joseph was approached by donors and organizations eager to support his work. With their help, he was able to expand the center's programs, establish satellite facilities in neighboring villages, and offer scholarships to children who showed academic promise. The power of forgiveness. One of the most profound moments of Joseph's journey came during a reconciliation event organized by a center. The event brought together community members who had been divided by years of conflict, mistrust, and pain. Joseph believed that true peace could only be achieved through understanding and forgiveness. Among the attendees was Lydia, Musa's wife. Joseph hadn't seen her since his days in their household, and the sight of her brought back a rush of memories, both painful and bittersweet. She looked older, her face etched with lines of hardship and regret. When Lydia approached him, her voice was hesitant, almost trembling. "Joseph," she said, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to tell you how sorry I am for the way I treated you." Joseph studied her face, searching for sincerity. He thought of the lessons he had learned about forgiveness, the sermons that had taught him to let go of anger and trust God's justice. "I forgave you a long time ago, Lydia," he said gently, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for both of us. Tears filled Lydia's eyes, and for the first time, Joseph saw the weight she had carried all these years. The exchange, though brief, was a testament to the healing power of forgiveness and the grace that came with letting go of the past. A global voice. As Joseph's work expanded, so did his platform. He traveled to cities across the world, sharing his story and advocating for vulnerable children. He spoke at universities, churches, and international forums, his words inspiring countless people to take action in their own communities. During one trip to the United States, Joseph visited a university where students had organized a fundraiser for his center. He was deeply moved by their enthusiasm and commitment, and he took the opportunity to speak with them about the importance of faith, education, and compassion. "Each of you has the power to make a difference," he told the students. "It doesn't matter where you come from or what challenges you faced. What matters is your willingness to see the humanity in others and to act with kindness and courage." The students hung on his every word, many of them later sharing how his story had inspired them to pursue careers in social work, education, and humanitarian aid. A legacy of hope. As the years passed, Joseph Center became a cornerstone of the community, a place where children and families found hope and healing. Many of the children who had once been its beneficiaries grew up to become teachers, counselors, and advocates, carrying forward Joseph's vision of a world where no child felt forgotten. One evening, as Joseph sat on the porch of the center, now much larger than it had been in its early days, he reflected on his journey. He thought of his parents, whose love had given him his first glimpse of God's grace. He thought of Musa and Lydia, whose cruelty had taught him the power of forgiveness. And he thought of Pastor Emmanuel and Mr. Kamau, whose kindness had set him on the path he now walked. Joseph opened his Bible, now worn and weathered from years of use, and turned to Philippians 4 verse 13, "I can do all things through him who gives me strength." The verse had carried him through his darkest moments and guided him toward a life of purpose. A young boy from the center approached him, holding a sketch he had drawn. "Mr. Joseph," the boy said, "this is you." Joseph took the sketch and smiled. It was a simple drawing of a man standing beneath a tree, surrounded by children. Above the man's head, the boy had written, "A light that shines." Tears filled Joseph's eyes as he looked at the drawing. It was a reminder of the impact one life could have when guided by faith, love, and a willingness to serve others. Joseph's work didn't end there. His organization grew into a global network, partnering with schools, churches, and NGOs to provide education and support to thousands of children. His message of hope and resilience continued to inspire, touching hearts in every corner of the world. But Joseph remained humble, always reminding others and himself that his journey was not about personal glory, but about glorifying God. "I am just a servant," he often said. "Everything I have done through his strength." Joseph's legacy was not just the buildings he had constructed or the programs he had launched. It was the lives he had changed, the hope he had restored, and the faith he had shared. And as he looked out at the children playing on the grounds of the center, he knew that the light he had found in his darkest moments would continue to shine for generations to come.
Shadows of sorrow and pain, a child of the storm, lost in the rain, alone in the world, no hand to hold. The nights grew so dark, the wind so cold, bruised and battered, a soul torn apart, searching for meaning, a light in his heart. But even in silence a whisper was near, "Hold on my child, for I am here." From the ashes he rose, with a faith burning bright, a beacon of hope in the depths of the night. Through trials and tears, he found his way, turning pain into purpose, a brighter day. With love as his guide and God as his flame, he built a legacy more than a name. The weight of the past, the scars that remain, couldn't defeat him, couldn't restrain. A kind hand reached out, a heart full of grace, showed him a future no pain could erase. He learned to forgive, to let anger go, planting the seeds that only love could grow. The lessons of loss became strength for the weak. Through faith in the Lord he found what he'd seen. From the ashes he rose, with a faith burning bright, a beacon of hope in the depths of the night. Through trials and tears he found his way, turning pain into purpose, a brighter day. With love as his guide and God as his flame, he built a legacy more than a name. Now children laugh where sorrow once grew, their dreams take flight and skies clear and blue. His story is theirs, a gift to proclaim, that hope lives forever in God's holy name. From the ashes he rose, with a faith burning bright, a beacon of hope in the depths of the night. Through trials and tears he found his way, turning pain into purpose, a brighter day. With love as his guide and God as his flame, he built a legacy more than a name. A legacy of hope, a light that will stay, guiding the lost to a brand new day. Through faith, through love, the broken will see the power of God to set their hearts free.